next week. All reports I'm getting, they're doing fine. So, Alan had the mishap last week when he slipped in the baptismal pool. Kind of hurt himself, but there was a doctor in the group, kind of looked at him, pronounced him okay. I was just thankful that he didn't drown somebody when he slipped. So that meant it was a success, okay? Well, last week, Mr. Struble had a chance to share with you, and, he shared on wisdom and did a very good detailed job on wisdom. And one of the comments he made at the beginning was, do we know the number of our days? And I don't. And that kind of struck me a little bit when he said that last week, because that's kind of what I wanted to share this week. And when he first said that, it's like, oh, there goes my message. But he went a different direction, and we were all blessed. And then after the service, we were looking at Connect cards that you filled out and turned in the basket. And you saw those are collected during the offering time. And I think there were 3 cards that their prayer request, the only thing they asked for was wisdom. Amen. And then Bob shares for 40 minutes on wisdom. So kind of answered before it even got in front of us. So I guess, I would start, do you ever think about what the end of your life would be? Yeah. Some of us do. I never really thought about it too much. I think about it a little more now, but I didn't used to. At one time, I was afraid of that thought, but not anymore. There is no fear in our God. So I was looking this week in the dictionary, Webster's dictionary. Well, it's been around forever. And I was looking up the word destiny. And it says a couple meanings. It says that which is bound to happen. Then it says your fate. That which seems to make things happen the way they do. Again, it says fate. And then right above that it said destined, to head towards a goal or end, as if by fate. So then I went ahead a little bit and I looked at fate. A power that is supposed to settle ahead of time what or how things will happen. And I got to thinking, I think fate is kind of a carnal word. I think as Christians we would choose faith or providence or God's will. So God's will aims us towards our destiny. Then as I was looking on a little bit farther, I was thinking about, I was reading about what Paul said about running the race and how he finished it well. And when you look in the Bible, race, there's three or four mentions of the word race. In Ecclesiastes, it says, the race is not to the swift. And we were all little kids. You remember we all heard the story about the rabbit and the tortoise, the hare and the tortoise. And, one was swift, one was fast. But he doesn't necessarily win the race. 1 Corinthians says that in a race, all runners run. So in other words, we should all be running. To some point, we should all be running in this race. In 2 Timothy, I'm going to read this one. 2 Timothy 4, verses 7 and 8. And Paul, as he's talking, says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So Paul's actually proclaiming the fact that he feels he ran the race well. And when you look at all the exploits of Paul in the Bible, he ran that race pretty good. He finished well. He deserved that crown that he got. So I got a chance to share a little bit on Wednesday night with the hub last week with Alan and Tom out of town. And I was just kind of thinking, and I was sharing with the people about some of the people in the Old Testament and how they ran the race, and they didn't even know they had a race to run. This is before any of the new revelations, and Jesus hadn't come yet. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be hearing from God, not through Jesus or someone else, but you're just trying to hear from God, and you're trying to do it right. Adam and Eve, first couple. What a relationship they had with God. He walked in that garden and conversed with them every day. And then the serpent intervened, and their lives were changed. Did they finish the race well? I put a question mark next to that one. I know they were embarrassed, and all of a sudden they're toiling their lives away, which wasn't the way it was supposed to be. But I just have a feeling that God forgave them, and I'm fairly certain they finished well, but I don't know. Then if we look at, and we're just going to jump around to a few of the older Old Testament people. Moses should have been killed when he was a young child, when he was a baby. And he gets plucked out of the river by Pharaoh's daughter's maids. She intervened. He ends up serving God mightily. The Pharaoh's daughter saved him, and he ends up serving God in a mighty way. And we all know all the exploits of Moses and the confrontations that he had. Did he finish well? You bet he did. Then we'll move to Saul, king of Israel. He was a delight in God's eyes at one time, but then he lost the favor of God. He ended up suffering from evil spirits. He spent the tail end of his life trying to kill David. Chases after David. David gets a couple chances to kill Saul, but he doesn't take him. He spares him, but Saul ends up defeated and commits suicide. Did Saul finish well? Not hardly. Then David finds favor in God's sight as a young lad. Shepherd boy. He goes on to defeat Goliath because of the faith that he had in God. He's honored by Saul for that. And then he has to flee when Saul takes after him. David actually mourns when Saul and Jonathan die. David becomes king of Israel. He commits adultery and murder. He's rebuked by Nathan. He asks for forgiveness. We read about David and his sackcloth and ashes, and God restores David. Did he finish well? Yes. David finished well. Just a couple more and then we'll move on. Samson. His birth was foretold in the scriptures. He was sanctified and committed to God. Samson was a mighty man, a mighty warrior. He defeated the Philistines. Then he's betrayed by a woman. And that's not degrading any of you women here, but he was betrayed by a woman. He loses his strength. He recommits himself. And in the end, he destroys many in his death. He took many with him. Did he finish well? Yeah, pretty much. So you've seen a couple here that have been committed to Jesus, or to God at that time, not Jesus, committed to God. They go off on a wayward path. They come back and ask for forgiveness, and I think they finish well. John the Baptist. His birth was foretold to Elizabeth. He preached repentance. He bore witness to Jesus Christ. He baptizes Jesus. Herod catches him, puts him in prison. And a young woman convinces Herod to kill John. And he cuts off his head. Did John finish well? Oh boy, John finished well. Then we come to Jesus. His birth was prophesied. He lived his life for the Father. Sinless. In the end, he was crucified. God raised him. He's still alive. Did Jesus finish well? Jesus isn't finished. Jesus is still running the race. He's at the finish line waiting for all of us. You know, we all die at some point. Does your life have meaning? Do you think it's going to be worth it in the end? Are you running your race well? Will you be commended by Jesus? That's our goal. We all hope. We never know when that time will come. Did Kobe know? If Kobe knew that was the end of his time, you think he would have taken his daughter with him? Did Kobe finish the race well? I don't have a clue. I don't know where he stood. So I can't tell you if he did or not. It just seems sometimes when something happens like that, you know, we think that their lives are incomplete. But their race is over. We all have the opportunity to change our destiny, our path to the end. We can change it. I'm going to share something here now that some people will be okay with, some people aren't going to like it. But that's the way it is. Rush Limbaugh, 2 weeks ago, he shares that he's got stage 4 lung cancer. And he used to smoke a lot. He doesn't. I mean, he likes his cigars now, but he always talks about rustling his papers in his formerly nicotine-stained fingers. Rush shared that he was at an awards banquet, and someone came up to his table and asked him to go greet some people at another table. They were a group of wounded warriors back from the war. Rush is a big proponent of that foundation. They greeted him and they shared their stories and they thanked him. He was flabbergasted that they were appreciative of his support. The leader of the group spoke up and told Rush that even though they sacrificed in the battlefield, they made a comment to Rush that he doesn't forget to this day. And they told him, we all have our own role to play. And I think that's a pretty strong statement, that we all have a role to play in this life. Some of us can't run the race exactly as the sprinter or the marathon person. But there's always something, when we're all running that race in our way, we've all got something to give, something to share. Bruce Gentner gave me a couple pages out of a book from Steve Witt when he heard what I was going to share on. And there were a couple scriptures. And one of them was Jeremiah 29:11, and he says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And that's not Steve Witt. Those are words from God. Amen. And then Steve wrote this script, put this scripture in. It says Proverbs 16:9. A man's heart plans his way. Amen. And it does. But the Lord directs his steps. Yes. So if we don't let God direct where we plan to go, probably not going to end well. Yeah. Steve put a little story in this book. And Steve was challenged when he was 23 years old. His mentor challenged him to write a life plan. And I think his mentor expected him to give a basic, serve God, love God, answer God's call. Well, Steve took the assignment seriously and planned his life out to the age of 85. So that's your heart making plans for a long way out. And it was in detail. His mentor was amused. One of the examples Steve shares in his list was he included a trip to Australia at age 38. So he's 23, and in 15 years he's going to go to Australia. Sure enough, when Steve was 38 years old, he started receiving invites to speak in Australia. He ended up making 8 trips in 5 years, starting when he was 38 years old. Did God put in Steve's heart regarding his future? Or did God look at Steve's plan and say, let's go for it? Could have been either way. I'm sure God stirred in his heart what he wanted Steve to do, and then God just acknowledged it. Steve also shared, if we don't think about where and how we want to finish, then we're more likely to drift on the current of circumstance or default to others to make decisions for us. Amen. And where do you stand in that? A lot of times it's easy to go with the flow and majority rules, and someone suggests we do this, and yeah, we could probably do that. But I think I'd rather have a plan, my own plan. Then if it fails, all I got to do is look in the mirror and then look at the Father and say, I'm sorry. I thought this would work out. But I can't blame it on somebody else, that I was just going with the group. You know, these kind of things don't only happen to well-known people. I'd just like to take a minute and consider some of our own. And I'll give you two people here. There's been many. These were two people dear to my heart, dear to Pam and mine heart. Hold it together. First one was Susan Capps. She had a plan. She shared it with people. She shared it with Dan and others. She was running the race until the end. She didn't think she'd finished and just kind of sat on her laurels. She was running until the end. Amen. Did she get her crown? Yeah. Absolutely. And she probably took that crown and threw it right at Jesus' feet, because she probably felt she wasn't worthy of it, because that's who Susan was. That's who Susan still is. Another one is Garry Amos, a man who loved and trusted God. He used his talents to serve others until the end. And he was still doing it when God called him home. He got his crown too. They both had their role to play in this race, and they both ran it well. So again, we can ask Jesus to help us finish the race as he wants us to, not as we think we need to finish it. But let's ask him to help us finish it the way he wants. You know, we all have a bearing on others in our life. Family, friends, the workplace, the school, whatever vocation we're in. And that bearing can be either positive or it can be negative. Don't you think it would be better to be positive influence than the other way around? Jesus can help us make that decision. I want to take just a minute and just shift gears just a little bit. Some of you people know Pam and I pretty well. Some of you don't. I met Jesus 40 years ago in this church. It wasn't in this building, but it was this church family was about 26 years old. And when I was growing up, didn't have anything to do with church, God. I was keeping score at one time, and I was ahead. Some events had happened, and I was ahead 3-0. God he couldn't keep up with me. And that changed. That changed on Father's Day, 1980. And I used to get up on Sunday morning, and I would go play golf, go play tennis, go do something. And I would get up before Pam got up to go to church, because she was going to this church already. And I would get up and go. One morning, she got up before I did and waited for me when I was getting ready to go out the door. And she said, "You know, you've told me before you'd go to church with me." And I said, "Okay, in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I'll go to church with you." Well, 2 weeks later, Bob got up a little extra early because he was getting out of that house before it was time to go. She was already up. She was waiting. And, so I went to church with her, and afterwards I went back to where I worked, and I said, this place is nuts. The guy that preached works in the oil field, and he came in from the oil field in his coveralls and changed clothes and got up, grabbed a guitar, started worshiping on a guitar, and then started to share the word. And I says, and boy, they just all want to hug everybody. They just want to hug everybody. I said, they're nuts. But I came back another time. Then I went to a different church. I went to a little Baptist church in Rootstown. And they had a preacher, visiting preacher came in, and he takes off his coat, throws it on the floor, takes off his watch, throws it on the floor, and he's starting to preach about just the evils of things. So then they take an offering. They take an offering. After a few minutes, they take another offering. This is for the pastor's wife. She's a special person, so we're going to take an offering for the pastor's wife. So, I'd been in my pocket twice. Third time comes, he says, let's take another offering. They're going to do another offering for the church. And it's like, I'm broke. And that basket goes down the line. Bob takes his fist, puts his fingers in, jingles up the change that's already in there. So I made my donation. And I went home. I told Pam, I said, that community of believers isn't all that bad, is it? And I started coming to church. I still didn't want a whole lot to do with anybody. But I came and I listened. And I would sit close to the back. And they would give an altar call. When they would give an altar call, I would take a step forward. And then I'd take 2 steps back. They'd keep talking, and I'd come forward a step and back 2. The next thing you know, I'm at the back door, working my way out. And that went on for several weeks. And one of the guys in the fellowship, Chuck, he saw what was going on. Must have been 3rd or 4th week. It was Father's Day. And Steve's giving the message, and he's giving the altar call. And Bob gets out in line, and he takes a step, and he starts to walk backwards. And Chuck Wimberly laid his hand on my shoulder and said, "Is there a problem, son?" That's what it took to break me. I came down that aisle, prayed with Steve, went in the back. They prayed with me back there. And Bob Allen died that day. There was a new guy came out of that hallway in the back of that cafeteria. He's not been the same since. And I didn't share that to just show me. It's not about me. That's what Rush says. It's not about me. But I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't chase after women. I've been married 8 years. I was faithful to my wife. I wasn't a bad person, but I needed a change in my life. Amen. People now feel they can't come forward because they've got drug problems, or they're alcoholics, or they've got some kind of addiction. He's big enough to take care of all that. He just wants you where you're at, and he wants you to just open yourself up and say, I need a change in my direction. I want to trust you. So Laura, if you guys want to come on up here. And I'm going to close with this. I'm actually going to give you the opportunity that I had almost 40 years ago. And there'll be some people down here. The altar team will be down here to pray. And if there's anyone in the sanctuary today that doesn't know Jesus, as Laura sang and some of the songs, he'll be your best friend. He'll be the one that holds you when you're trying to grab on for dear life. He'll be there for you. And all you have to do is surrender. And also, if someone is here today and just feels that they're ready for you're a Christian, but you're ready for a change in the direction, a change in what you think is your destiny, come on down. We'd like to pray for you for that. And really, if you have any need, and you just need prayed for anything today, this altar is always open for anything. But I just particularly think if someone needs to know Jesus, today's the day. Because we don't know when the end of our days are coming. And if you need a change, now's the time. Because you already know what you should be doing. And it'd be great to come down here and just get a confirmation from God that, yeah, let's do this. So I'm going to pray. Father, just I thank you for this opportunity to share my heart with my brothers and sisters. Share my heart with those I don't know. Maybe someone who doesn't know you. But Lord, the majority of us in this room do know you. And we know the change that it's made in our lives. So Lord, just draw those to you today that haven't talked to you or haven't had that relationship with you. And Lord, bring others down that need a touch from you and need a reassuring, not maybe a challenge or a guide, and just encouragement that you can help them change their ways. So Lord, I just thank you for this place. I thank you for you being here. Your spirit hovers in this room all the time. And we're thankful that you're not a Sunday-only God, that you're a daily God. And as Laura gets ready, Laura sang about a new song when she was just playing. And she was singing from her heart, from the rising of the sun. I'll sing a new song. You know, the neat thing about that is that comment means that there will never be a time where there isn't a new song. because this sun, as we revolve around that sun, the sun is rising somewhere all the time. So there's always someone singing that new song. Lord, just accept it from our hearts to your throne. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Come on forward if you're interested. So glad you're here today. And we hope to have you back soon. Pastor Tom and Alan will be back next week. So just take this afternoon before it snows.